What happens when a judge becomes the very thing justice was meant to stop? When the system built to uphold the law is weaponized to crush the truth? This isn't just another courtroom drama. It's the unraveling of power, arrogance, and the illusion of untouchability. One woman walked into a courtroom filled with smirks and silence, armed not with politics, but with proof. In a battle where every word is strategy and every silence screams, she's not here to play fair. She's here to burn the mask off the system, and what follows might just change everything. Jefferson City stirred under a shroud of morning fog. Outside the federal courthouse, chaos buzzed through the crisp air. News vans lined the streets, protest signs waved like flags, and a throng of voices clashed in real time. At the center of the media frenzy, Layla Estrada held a mic, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "This isn't just about corruption," she said, staring directly into the camera. "It's about who gets to challenge it." And with that, the lens pivoted toward a single figure stepping out of a black sedan. Pam Bondi. Clad in a muted gray suit, her heels echoed sharply against the courthouse steps. She didn't pause for cameras, didn't glance at the protesters. One arm cradled a thick file labeled State v. Moreland. The other swayed in controlled rhythm with each determined stride. Cameras panned from her shoes to her expression, steel eyes unreadable. Not a word spoken, yet the silence around her shifted. She wasn't just entering a courthouse, she was entering a battlefield. Inside, Judge Franklin Whitlow was already seated on the bench. Tall, gaunt, with hands rhythmically tapping the wood, he exuded cold command. His black robe seemed to drink in the light. Kendra Wolfe leaned toward her client, Clint Moreland, muttering something with a smirk. Clint crossed his legs, smug and relaxed. Meanwhile, the jury exchanged subtle glances, curious, doubtful. To them, Pam looked like a solo act in a room full of power. Pam took her place. She opened her mouth to begin. "Your Honor, this case presents..." But Whitlow didn't even lift his head. "Miss Bondi," he interrupted, voice dry and condescending. "I assume we won't waste the court's time with another morality lecture today?" Laughter flickered through the defense table. A court clerk hid a smile. Pam remained motionless, absorbing the sting. She waited. Then, eyes sweeping the courtroom, she said, calm, firm, without an ounce of heat, "I came here for justice, not courtesy." The room froze. Not another sound followed. Even Whitlow said nothing. And for the first time, the crowd stopped underestimating her. The next morning, Pam Bondi opened her folder with precision, unbothered by the lingering tension from the day before. She stepped toward the screen and gestured for the first slide. "This," she said, "is the state-approved budget for the North Jefferson redevelopment zone. Over $2,900,000 0 cents was approved. But based on internal audits, the majority of those funds never reached their destination." Her voice was even, deliberate, not a crack in her tone. She requested to enter 2 supplemental documents, the approval memo from the Missouri Department of Finance and a ledger from Moreland Redevelopment Partners. Before she could proceed, Whitlow leaned forward, gavel in hand. "We're not turning this courtroom into a spreadsheet convention," he snapped. The blow landed, not because of legal merit, but because of pure contempt. Gasps didn't follow this time, just fatigue. Jurors shifted in their seats. One rubbed his temple, another let out an audible sigh. Kendra Wolfe whispered with a smirk, "She brought numbers to a fight for influence." At the back of the room, Layla Estrada's fingers danced across her phone. A tweet went live within seconds. Bondi being buried in red tape. Live. Pam walked back to her table, slowly, controlled. She sat, gripping the file until her knuckles turned white. Her shoulders were square, but her silence screamed louder than any argument. She glanced up, her eyes not pleading, not breaking, but watching. Studying Whitlow. A storm was forming, quiet but undeniable. The camera zoomed in from behind, framing her in isolation. To some, it looked like the system had turned its back on her. But Pam hadn't turned hers. And anyone paying close enough attention could tell she was just getting started. Silence pulsed through the courtroom like a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. Every breath seemed to catch in the air as Pam Bondi rose slowly from her seat. Her heels echoed against the polished floor with each step toward the presentation screen. She set a thick, cream-colored folder down with the care of someone placing a scalpel before surgery. No preamble, no dramatics, just the click of a remote and a slide lit up on the projection screen behind her. A construction contract appeared, sealed and time-stamped by the Jefferson City Redevelopment Commission. A $2,900,000, 0 cents line item glowed near the top. Pam's gaze swept the room before landing squarely at the bottom corner of the page. Her voice, steady and sharp, signed and approved by Judge Franklin Whitlow. It didn't explode. It rippled, and the ripple hit hard. Whitlow froze. His once rhythmic tapping fingers now twitched, then clenched. His mouth tightened. The power he had wielded just seconds earlier drained from his posture. Clint Moreland adjusted his tie with a stiff jerk, his expression now pale and pinched. Kendra Wolf's smirk vanished, replaced by a tight line as she leaned toward her assistant and whispered something urgent. The jury rustled. Pages flipped in nervous hands. Jurors scanned their previously ignored paper packets with a new intensity. "This document," Pam continued, "is no longer about numbers. It's about accountability." Whitlow cleared his throat. His voice cracked slightly as he muttered, "That document is taken out of context." But no one moved to agree. The lie hung in the air like a rotten fruit, too obvious, too late. Across the aisle, Riley Shaw clicked his camera. The flash briefly caught Whitlow's face, the strain, the crack, the sweat glistening at his temple. For the first time, his mask had slipped. Pam didn't press further. She closed the folder softly, deliberately. Her hand moved to rest on a small black box sitting beside her files. The courtroom caught its breath. The recorder, they touch it. She didn't have to. A single tweet from Layla Estrada exploded online. "We just crossed the Rubicon." The courtroom was a vacuum, soundless, airless, still. Pam stepped forward with a calm that felt surgical. She reached for the small recorder, placed it neatly on the wooden podium, and pressed play. A brief crackle. Then a voice. Male. Steady. Calculated. Make sure she never sees those ledgers. There was no mistaking it. It was Whitlow. A collective jolt went through the room like a silent scream. One juror dropped his pen. Its clatter seemed deafening. Clint Moreland wiped his forehead with the back of a shaking hand. The sweat wasn't from heat. It was from truth exposed. Whitlow didn't speak. He couldn't. He closed his eyes, not to gather strength, but as if hoping, foolishly, to wake up from a nightmare he created. Pam didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She pulled out a folder stamped with an official red seal and laid it on the table. "This," she said softly, "is a certified transcript, time-stamped, verified by the Office of Inspector General." She slid it across the wood like a final blade. There were no objections, no gasps, just the thunderous roar of nothing. No one dared move. No one dared speak. Riley Shaw lowered his camera. Layla Estrada leaned into her mic and whispered, voice reverent, "History's being made in Jefferson City." The recorder continued to hum, as if unwilling to release its grip on the room. Pam stood still, unmoving, a figure carved in resolve. Justice wasn't just spoken. It was heard. The silence after the recording hadn't lifted. It hung over the courtroom like the final breath before a collapse. Judge Whitlow sat frozen at the bench, hands clenched together in a trembling grip. Gone was the casual tapping, the smug confidence. What remained was a man unraveling by the second. Kendra Wolf stole a glance at her watch. It wasn't time management, it was instinct. She could feel the room turning. Her posture shifted, no longer smug but guarded. The jury no longer looked amused or indifferent. They sat upright, alert, as if witnessing something historical unfold before them. Their eyes no longer judged Pam. They watched her like one watches a storm gather its force. Then, the click. The doors of the courtroom burst open. The creak of the hinges struck like a gunshot. Every head turned. U.S. Marshal Rory Shaw entered, flanked by 2 federal agents in dark tactical vests. One agent withdrew a sealed document. Rory's voice carried through the marble chamber, calm but irrevocable. "Judge Franklin Whitlow, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to destroy federal evidence, and abuse of judicial power." The words landed like stone on steel. Whitlow didn't move. He stared ahead blankly, as if the world had suddenly shifted beneath him and left him behind. His skin turned gray. One of the agents moved forward, gently but firmly pulling his arms behind his back and securing them in handcuffs. The metallic click rang louder than any gavel ever could. It was the sound of a reign ending. In the gallery, no one rose to object. No clerks spoke. No bailiff dared meet his eye. The silence of complicity fell heavy. Riley Quinn stood slowly and whispered to no one in particular. "About damn time." Clint Moreland sprang to his feet, panic written across every twitch of his face. "We can still work this out. There's no need to turn this into a show." But Pam was already walking. She moved to stand between Clint and the door, composed as ever. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut like a blade. "If you're nervous, Mr. Moreland, perhaps you have more to hide." Clint's mouth opened, but no sound followed. Meanwhile, Whitlow was being escorted down the center aisle. His judge's robe sagged off one shoulder, dragging along the floor like the last remnant of authority that no longer belonged to him. Cameras flashed. Justice Wire live-streamed it all. Layla Estrada's voice came through the mic, low and clear. "The robe has fallen, so has the illusion." Outside, the storm had broken. The spotlight now fell on the last man left standing. Clint Moreland sat hunched at the defense table, sweat soaking the collar of his custom-tailored suit. His hands gripped a file like a lifeline, knuckles white, lips trembling. No one sat beside him now. Pam approached with quiet authority. There was no triumph in her face, only certainty. She was no longer the attorney making her case. She was the embodiment of justice, calling the powerful to account. She stopped in front of him, her voice calm but unyielding. "Would you like to continue this trial, or discuss a plea?" Clint blinked slowly, like someone surfacing from a nightmare. Then his head dropped. "I want protection," he said, barely a whisper, a plea from a man who'd just realized he was never untouchable. Pam nodded once, no gloating, no smile. She returned to her seat as the courtroom buzzed to life, but she remained the eye of the storm. Outside the courthouse, the world responded. Layla Estrada led with the headline. Systems shook, justice spoke, and Missouri watched it live. Riley Quinn, now unshackled from bureaucratic silence, held a press conference on the courthouse steps, announcing a federal investigation into judicial corruption across the state. Meanwhile, Nina Park stood at a university auditorium, her voice reaching a new generation. Title 42 wasn't written for us, but we're rewriting what justice looks like, starting today. And across the country, in a law classroom at UCLA, a student picked up a piece of chalk and wrote on the blackboard in bold strokes, "Accountability isn't revenge, it's democracy." Back inside, the last echoes of the day's judgment still lingered in the marble halls. Pam exited the courtroom, head held high. No applause. No cameras rushing her. Just rows of people standing in silence along the hallway, watching her pass like a symbol in motion. She stepped outside. The sky was still gray, but the light had changed. The late afternoon sun pierced through the clouds, casting a beam directly across her shoulder. And as she walked away, the voiceover returned, quiet but unwavering. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." In a world where truth is often buried beneath titles, power, and procedure, justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes, it speaks in silence. It reveals itself in the stillness after resistance, in the quiet reckoning that follows a storm. This story was never just about guilt or innocence. It was about the weight of accountability, the courage it takes to confront an institution, and the unshakable belief that even the most rigid systems can be forced to bend toward truth. If it stirred something in you, questions, emotions, or simply curiosity, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here, and if stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this isn't the end, it's only the beginning of holding the powerful accountable, one truth at a time.